The story begins on a quiet forest road. An older man, Daniel, sits in a worn-out wheelchair, looking around with fear and confusion. His son stands nearby, cold and distant. Daniel requests desperately, "Please don't leave me here. This is where I left my father." His voice cracks with panic as he tries to grab his son's hand, but the young man steps back. The son says firmly, "You deserve this," before walking away, leaving Daniel alone. Tears stream down Daniel's face as he looks around the silent forest, haunted by memories of the past. I hope you will like this instructive story. Let me know in the comments. Let's start now. Daniel was a kind and hardworking young man with dreams of a happy life. He grew up in a modest home with his loving father, who raised him alone after his mother passed away. His father, though elderly and in a wheelchair, was full of wisdom and deeply cared for Daniel. Things changed when Daniel married Sarah, a beautiful but strong-willed woman. At first, their life seemed perfect, but soon Sarah's true colors began to show. She often made sharp comments about Daniel's father, calling him a burden. Sarah didn't like having Daniel's black father living with them. She complained about his presence, saying it made her uncomfortable and ruined her peace. Over time, her comments turned into demands. She pressured Daniel, saying, "We deserve a better life without him holding us back." Daniel loved his father, but felt torn between his wife's wishes and his loyalty to the man who raised him. Sarah's words began to weigh heavily on Daniel. She painted a picture of a future without stress, without the responsibility of caring for his father. Slowly, Daniel started to see his father as an obstacle to their happiness. Though he felt guilt deep down, he convinced himself that Sarah was right. He had no idea that the decision he was about to make would haunt him for the rest of his life. One cold evening, Daniel made the hardest and cruelest decision of his life. After weeks of pressure from Sarah, he finally gave in. With a heavy heart, he approached his father, who was sitting in his wheelchair, peacefully reading a book. Daniel hesitated, his hands trembling, but Sarah's voice echoed in his mind. "If you love me, you'll do what's right for us." He told his father they were going for a drive. The elderly man, unaware of Daniel's intentions, smiled warmly and said, "It's been a while since we went out together." As they drove through the winding forest road, Daniel couldn't even look at his father. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, his guilt almost unbearable. When they reached a desolate spot deep in the forest, Daniel stopped the car. His father looked around, confused. "Why are we stopping here, son?" he asked softly. Without answering, Daniel got out, opened the trunk, and pulled out the wheelchair. He helped his father out of the car, avoiding his gaze. As he placed his father in the wheelchair, the elderly man's confusion turned to worry. "Daniel, what's going on?" his father asked, his voice trembling. Daniel finally spoke, his words cold and distant. "You can't live with us anymore. Sarah and I need space to build our own life." His father's face fell, his eyes filling with tears. "Son, please don't do this. I raised you. I gave you everything I had. How can you leave me here?" But Daniel couldn't bring himself to listen. He turned his back and walked to the car. His father called out, his voice breaking, "Daniel, please, don't leave me here." Daniel froze for a moment, his guilt screaming at him to stop. But Sarah's words drowned out his father's cries. He got into the car and drove away, leaving his father alone in the dark forest. As Daniel drove back home, tears streamed down his face. His father's voice echoed in his mind, but he tried to push it away. He told himself it was for the best, that it was necessary for his new life with Sarah. But deep down, he knew he had just committed an unforgivable act. After abandoning his father in the forest, Daniel tried to move on with his life. At first, he avoided thinking about what he had done. He threw himself into work and focused on building a life with Sarah. The couple seemed happy on the surface. They bought a new house, decorated it beautifully, and even hosted dinners with friends. Sarah often praised Daniel for prioritizing their marriage, and her approval gave him some comfort. But deep down, Daniel couldn't escape the guilt. Every time he saw an elderly man in the streets or heard a father talking to his son, he was reminded of his own father's heartbroken face. He convinced himself he had done the right thing. Sarah assured him, "It was for the best, Daniel. Your father would have held us back." And for a while, Daniel believed her. Years went by, and Daniel became a father himself. He worked hard to provide for his family and made sure his own son, Ethan, had everything he needed. He wanted to be a good father, but there was always an emptiness in his heart. He avoided talking about his own father. When Ethan once asked, "Dad, where's Grandpa?" Daniel brushed off the question, saying, "He's not with us anymore." Sarah, on the other hand, seemed to have completely forgotten about the incident. She was focused on their new life and didn't notice how Daniel's guilt was slowly eating away at him. At family gatherings or celebrations, Daniel would sit quietly, lost in thought. The memory of his father's pleading voice haunted him, especially in the quiet moments. As the years passed, Daniel achieved success and wealth, but none of it brought him peace. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Despite the love of his wife and son, a deep regret lingered in his heart. He wondered if he would ever be able to forgive himself for what he had done. Life moved on, but the shadow of his past never left him. Years passed, and Daniel grew older. His once energetic body became frail, and he found himself relying more and more on his son, Ethan. Ethan, now a young man, had grown up watching his father work hard and provide for the family. But Ethan also noticed how distant Daniel could be, how he avoided talking about his own father, and how he carried a sadness that he never fully explained. As Daniel aged, his relationship with Ethan began to change. Ethan became busy with his own life, starting a career and making friends. He loved his father, but started to feel burdened by Daniel's growing needs. Ethan often heard his mother, Sarah, complain about Daniel's health and how much care he required. Over time, Ethan started to feel frustrated, much like Daniel had felt years ago with his own father. One day, Ethan and Daniel had a heated argument. Daniel, now in a wheelchair, asked for Ethan's help with something simple. But Ethan snapped, saying, "I can't keep taking care of you, Dad. I have my own life to live." His words hit Daniel like a punch to the chest. They were almost identical to the words he had said to his own father all those years ago. Not long after, Ethan made a shocking decision. He told his father they were going for a drive to get some fresh air. Daniel, though surprised, was happy to spend time with his son. As they drove, Daniel noticed that they were heading toward the outskirts of town, near a forest. A terrible sense of familiarity washed over him, but he stayed silent. When Ethan stopped the car and opened the door, Daniel's fears were confirmed. Ethan pulled out the wheelchair and helped his father out of the car. Daniel's hands shook as he realized they were in the same spot where he had left his own father years ago. His voice trembled as he asked, "Ethan, what are you doing?" Ethan's face was cold and distant. "I can't do this anymore, Dad," he said. You'll have to figure it out on your own." Daniel's heart broke into a million pieces. Tears filled his eyes as he begged, "Please, Ethan, don't leave me here. I left my own father in this very spot. Don't repeat my mistake." Ethan hesitated for a moment, but shook his head. He turned away, got into the car, and drove off, leaving Daniel alone in the forest. As the sound of the car faded, Daniel sat in silence, the weight of his past crashing down on him. The cycle had repeated, and he was now living the same pain he had once caused. Sitting alone in the forest, Daniel felt the cold wind against his skin. The silence around him was deafening. His mind was flooded with memories of his father. The day he abandoned him, the pleading in his father's voice, and the sadness in his eyes. Now, he understood every emotion his father must have felt. The pain, the betrayal, and the overwhelming loneliness were now his reality. Tears streamed down Daniel's face as he whispered, "I'm sorry, Father. I'm so sorry." He realized how selfish he had been, blinded by the desire to please Sarah and build a new life. He had convinced himself that leaving his father was necessary, but deep down he knew it was wrong. And now, fate had brought him full circle, forcing him to experience the very pain he had caused. Daniel's thoughts turned to Ethan. He remembered raising his son, teaching him to walk, cheering at his school events, and helping him with his homework. He had poured his love into Ethan, hoping to be a better father than he felt he had. But now he saw how his actions had taught Ethan the wrong lessons. Ethan had learned to abandon those in need, just as Daniel had abandoned his father. The forest around him seemed darker, colder. Daniel's heart ached, not just from the physical abandonment, but from the weight of his mistakes. He realized how the choices we make ripple across generations. He had failed to break the cycle of neglect, and now he was paying the price. As the hours passed, Daniel began to feel a strange sense of clarity. He couldn't change the past, but he could use this moment to reflect on his life. He vowed that if he ever got the chance, he would make amends. He would tell Ethan the truth about what happened all those years ago and try to guide him toward a better path. In the quiet of the forest, Daniel felt small and powerless, but he also felt the stirrings of hope. Hope that even in his brokenness, there was still time to learn, to grow, and to leave a better legacy for the future. Hours passed as Daniel sat in the forest, lost in thought. The sun began to set, casting long shadows over the trees. Just when he felt completely alone, he heard the crunch of footsteps on the path. His heart raced, unsure if it was hope or fear. To his surprise, Ethan returned. His face was filled with guilt and regret. Ethan knelt beside his father, tears in his eyes. "Dad, I'm sorry," he said, his voice shaking. "I don't know what came over me. I was angry, frustrated, but I shouldn't have done this. I shouldn't have left you here." Daniel looked into his son's eyes and saw the boy he had raised, not the cold man who had abandoned him earlier. Daniel placed a trembling hand on Ethan's shoulder. "I forgive you," he said softly, "but there's something you need to know." Slowly, Daniel recounted the story of his own father, how he had left him in this same place and walked away without looking back. Ethan listened in silence, his expression a mixture of shock and sadness. "Now you see," Daniel continued, "how our actions can come back to us. I failed my father, and today I paid the price. But you have the chance to break this cycle. You don't have to make the same mistakes I did." Ethan nodded, wiping away his tears. "I will, Dad. I'll do better. I promise." He helped Daniel back into the car, and they drove home together in silence, both lost in their thoughts. In the days that followed, their relationship began to heal. Daniel opened up about his past, sharing lessons he had learned too late. Ethan, in turn, became more patient and caring, determined to honor his father and grandfather by being a better person. The experience changed both of them. Daniel found peace in acknowledging his mistakes and using them to teach his son. Ethan found a deeper respect for his father and a new sense of responsibility. Together, they broke the cycle of neglect and built a foundation of understanding and love that would guide their family for generations to come. We hope you enjoyed this story. For more related videos, please subscribe our channel and don't forget to like, share, and comment. Thanks for watching.